Hello and welcome along to a very special prediction show from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm joined by Charlie Betts and we are back for the second year in succession for the Irish Cup final, which is going to be on Friday night on BBC Two Northern Ireland between Larne and Linfield. 1,000 fans will be allowed to attend the event at Mornview Park, and it's going to be a cracking game because it's two of the sides that have had a very good season in the Irish League. So, Charlie, we're going to talk a little bit about both of the teams in the final, how they did in the semis, because, of course, they were on TV on just Tuesday night yesterday as we're recording this. So let's start with Larne. They got through, I think it would be fair to say, in controversial circumstances, Charlie. So talk to us a little bit about the finish to that game and the fallout, because we don't know for certain that it is going to be Larne just yet.
Yeah, I think I'll go into the game a bit more. I mean, the penalty shootout is just something you've never seen before. I suppose by the letter of the law, his feet, I think my understanding now is you've got to have one foot on the line or in contact with the line or something like that. Either way, for the free penalties, you could argue it wasn't. I think the third one was so tight. For me personally, I know it goes against the letter of the law. I probably would have used a bit of common sense and just said, look, you have to understand this is your final warning. This happens again, you're going to be off. Larne, on the whole of the game, we're going for that in a minute, did deserve to go through. So the right team in terms of the pattern of play went through, but the circumstances, it does leave a sour taste. Sadly, I know that Crusaders have put in a complaint and whatever else they're going to do. I think the council, like legal counsel was the term they were using. I can't see much happening. They're not going to change it before Friday night. This has been packed enough schedule as it is. I personally am not necessarily, we'll talk another day about the rule of whether I think you should have a foot on the line or not. But the fact is, that is the rule. By the third one, you'd have to make sure that your foot was definitely at least touching it. And he didn't, and unfortunately, they paid the price for it. So, as I say, on the balance of play, which we'll talk about in a minute, Larne were probably the better side and deserved to go through.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to move on to. Is obviously it was one of the most bizarre circumstances you've ever seen. I don't remember in my entire lifetime of watching football seeing a keeper sent off mid-penalty shootout. I'm happy to be corrected on that. But let's talk about the game itself, because Larne, in terms of the stats, in terms of the balance of play, as you said, probably did edge it and probably did just about deserve to go through. What do you think about Larne's performance and what positive signs did you see for the final? Where could they exploit Linfield?
Well, I'll get the negative out of the way. If I'm honest, the first 45, they were so very un-Larne, like very direct. And I just think that they've got some good midfielders in there. SADLER'S, for example. And I know that he gets a lot of the press, but the problem was they were going back to front very, very quickly. And they were so disjointed like that. They were giving away possession. And I mean this in the politest way possible. And he says, no, because it's one of my favourite leagues. If there's any league in the world that loves the ball in the air for centre-half to head, it's the Irish League. Their centre-halves are pretty much programmed to do it from day dot. So it was playing into Crusaders' hands. Crusaders have got moments of brilliance, like Ben Kennedy, some jinking little runs, but they are so disjointed. And I just felt like Larne in the first half didn't really exploit that. And then it was only when they brought on Johnny McMurray at half-time, a fantastic finisher, not the most mobile, and he wasn't going to run those channels, and therefore it forced them to play into his feet. It forced them to shorten the game up a bit, and it forced them to go through him, and then he could link up the play from there. So, because SADLER'S is so good at dictating that tempo. At times when he wants to go quick, he's brilliant. One touch and he'll ping it out to the wide man or straight into the centre forward's feet. Then at other times, he'll take the foul, he'll slow the game down. When it was bad was when they just went straight from back to front. So I appreciate that teams aren't going to just let you do that, but for me, Larne have to go through those thirds to be able to have any sort of chance of winning. In terms of the probably slightly negative things, I've said this all season about them. I do question the pace of the back three, and Larne plays such a high line, and it's great because they press and they press and they press, and they put Crusaders under so much trouble. Yeah. But we'll talk about some of the weapons that Linfield have got. You don't want to be going too high up the pitch because those three, as great as they are when the ball's in front of them, behind, it's really not their strong point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the thing with Larne is, we've seen it over the course of the season. At stages, they've struggled to convert draws into wins. And again, that was the case against Crusaders. It's creating clear-cut chances. I know they have scored the second most of the teams in the top half of the league, just behind Linfield this season. But defensively, again, they just have lapses. And they are the highest conceded goals of the top four. They do give away silly goals, and generally they are down to individual errors. I know you've spoken a lot. We quite often watch the games on Friday night on BBC Northern Ireland, and you're always talking about if Larne improved in that back three, they'd probably be a right force, because that is the area where they probably haven't strengthened the most, bar maybe Josh Robinson last summer.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think Kofi Barmer's going to Larne. That'll make a huge difference. You've got a young centre-half who's very good, very capable on the deck, and also he's very quick on the turn if the ball does go over the top. I think they probably need one more like him, but it's a fantastic start, and it does show that they're trying to address that area. In terms of a style matchup, they probably didn't want Linfield of the two, because we'll get onto them in a minute, but there's a lot of pacing behind that back line, which, like you say, if you're making errors as it is, and then you're probably paying a bit too high for the pace of the back three that you've got, posing that question of, are we not playing to our strengths in that sense?
Yeah, and then the final question I'm going to ask about Larne is, could you argue that given the fact that Linfield are almost champions, given the fact that Larne are in a scrap for third with last year's cup winners Glentoran, and of course that's the final automatic European spot depending on the cup winner, could you argue that this game's more important for Larne? Because whether they finish third or fourth, if they win the cup, they're straight into the European qualifiers. And that, with the new Europa Conference next season, we talked to Roy McGivern, the Linfield chairman, about the importance of that for sides in sort of mid-range nations in terms of coefficient. Could it be that for Larne, it is such an important game with their vision that just brings the extra 10%?
No, absolutely. I think, to be honest, you probably don't need the motivation to get up for a cup final. It's been a bit of a different Irish Cup because a third of the teams didn't play for obvious reasons, without going into pandemics and all of that. But it's like you get to an FA Cup final, you're always going to have that edge anyway. But there's always this talk, and I don't necessarily like it, not just with Larne, but any football club, about the media, about how much they've spent, how much money they've put into the club. Because I think of a lot of clubs who've got a wealthy owner. Larne have invested it very well. They've updated the facilities, everything, as well as just the playing staff. So for me, I don't really like that argument, but there has to be some financial recuperation for all of that that's gone in, and as well as the amazing experience of playing in Europe, there's the financial gains that come with that. So for me, you are right. Maybe that's a great motivator as a manager, and you've only got a 3-day turnaround between the games. Maybe that's a great motivator to say, this is what we can achieve as a club financially. Here is if we can get into Europe, it can make a difference. This and a knock-on effect, and potentially then kick on from there. European money in the Irish League, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a sec, because you've got some semi-pro teams, some professional teams, but lower down in terms of professional. The European money is a huge boost for them.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the opposition for this game, which are Linfield. Of course, they could well wrap up being champions in Northern Ireland in the next week, and this could turn into a big double in the two big competitions domestically. Now, the good thing for them is they got through much more convincingly against Ballymena. For the first 15 minutes, I think you'll agree, it looked like it was going to be one hell of a game. But of course, once the first went in, you sort of knew the writing was on the wall for Ballymena, didn't you?
Yeah, to be honest, and I think, Ballymena, there were some good signs from the front three, and it was just starting to cause Linfield problems. And I wouldn't say against the run of play, but it was certainly an even match. A slip at the back. I say a slip. I'm not entirely sure what Conor Keeley was doing. It looked like initially that it just fallen over, and then upon reflection, he might have been trying to slide to kick them. I'm not too sure. But as we'll talk about in a second, against teams of that level, you cannot afford to give them an inch. And that's unfortunately what happened. Goal goes in. And then unfortunately, it again became the Shane Lavery show. And for whatever he's going to do next season, he is I'm just saying this, as somebody watches a lot of the Irish League football like yourself, he is a different class, and you can see why he's probably going to move on. The thing is with him, he is so important to their lethal counter-attack, and that's what undone Ballymena, because then obviously at 0-0, especially with no extra time, you could argue that David Jeffrey was spot on and just going, right, we'll let the front three play, then we'll just have our two banks behind that. But you then make a mistake, goal, bang, and then unfortunately you're then chasing the game. And that's the worst position to be in against Linfield. Yeah. Of any when you're chasing the game against them, they'll just pick you off. And that's exactly what they did. They are, at the minute, possibly one of the most lethal teams I've seen in recent memory on the counter-attack. The speed from back to front is incredible. And that, when we mentioned about Larne earlier, if they get suckered in a bit and they start pushing up higher and higher up the pitch, you are going to ask that question of, if there's any team who could exploit that, it's got to be Linfield. So on that basis, I think, Ballymena probably played into their hands a little bit after a mistake, and then that was it. It was game over. But Shane Lavery was the main counter of that. But, even Joel Cooper in behind, he's so quick, so strong as well. So on the counter, Linfield are probably the best side in recent memory at the minute for it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I will give us one bit of credit for the pre-season predictions. I know you bizarrely didn't have Linfield to win the league, which you can explain yourself in a few weeks. However, we have got to bear in mind that we both said this will probably be the year that Shane Lavery maybe takes over the mantle from Andy Waterworth, and that has certainly happened this year. He's the top scorer in the league by a mile. They're obviously top of the league. They've scored 80 goals, and so many of those on the counter-attack. It's incredible. And they've not even got the best defensive record in the league, yet they are clear and look like they're going to be champions yet again. So I guess you said we're going to move on to the negatives. We've talked about the quality of Shane Lavery. We've talked about their ruthlessness going forward. You mentioned Joel Cooper coming back again in the winter. But defensively, a bit like Larne, of those sides at the top of the Irish League and those professional sides and the ones competing for Europe, they're not the strongest at the back, even though they're likely to be champions.
No, I agree. I sort of said this, there's some really good centre-halves game, Jimmy Callagher and people like that. But when the ball's in front of them, and I think what Ballymena were good at in the first 15 or 20 minutes, I know that Larne plays a slightly different formation, but it was quite a fluid front three. Shane McCartan was dropping off. Then you had McElroy cut inside. And I don't quite think Linfield quite sussed out how to cope with that. Then the goal came, and that obviously put the kibosh on the whole thing. But if I was Larne, I'd be looking at it for a bit of encouragement and thinking, if we keep quite a rigid formation, we're probably going to play into their hands a bit, going direct, as I mentioned earlier. if they can just rotate it a little bit, get Johnny McMurray to come in short, and then, you know, McDade in behind, for example, coming in from the wide areas, for me, I think that's probably the Achilles heel. Connor Pepper was hit and miss last night, a bit pacey, but the thing is, he likes to go forward on that counter, and it does leave holes. And that's where, if you've got a bit more of a fluid front three, it's not as easy to pick up, because then if you are, for example, the fullbacks, thinking, right, do I go forward? Do I mark him? Because he's not quite in that wide area, but he's not central either. The only thing I would add is, if Larne are good at anything I mentioned about being good in the area, right, is set pieces. Very good at set pieces. Linfield, if I'm honest, last night looked a bit suspect. If Ballamy looked like they're going to get anything out of the game, Chris Johns was a little bit flappy. I know he's a good keeper. I will say that for him, but he got a little bit flappy last night. There was a few that I just thought, if they connected a bit better, might have gone in. So again, if I was Larne, I'd be looking to maybe exploit that set pieces. However, you've got to really get in that third to do that, and it's going to be difficult with the way that Linfield play. For me, it's a great matchup, but it could end up being a landslide if one plays into the other's hands in that sense.
Well, this is the $1 million question, or potentially the big European question in Northern Ireland, if it's on Larne's side, is we've basically talked about, if both teams are playing to their strengths, it's going to be Larne playing a possession game and controlling the match, Linfield looking to hit on the counter-attack and do as well as they have done that all season. And you've got to decide, as our Northern Irish expert, which one of those two is going to come out on top. So are you going for the possession, the European reward for Larne, or are you going for the ruthless counter-attacking and the quality up front for Linfield? Which one are you opting for?
If you look at the pre-season predictions, I'm definitely not an expert. But on that basis, I don't know. The thing is that Larne have been slightly inconsistent. That's one thing Linfield, admittedly, they lost to Larne the other day. I know, I appreciate that. However, I still think they had half an eye on this. If you look at their squad selection, on that basis, I think, especially because you got to rest, I think Lavery came off 15, 20 minutes to go. That's a huge difference as well, because obviously the game was dead and buried. I just think between him and Joel Cooper on that counter-attack, I think Healy will be tactical enough to maybe soak up that first 20 minutes, let Larne creep up, and just, you know yourself, you played, you do get a bit excited if you have a lot of the ball and you start to play that high line and then bang, goal from there. So I think it's not going to happen. I was going to say late one from a corner, but it won't be that. I think Linfield will win by, they are a bit league, 3-1, 3-1 Linfield.
Well, this is interesting because we're not normally in agreement here in terms of the style of game, but I'm in agreement with you in the sense that I think this is going to be a cracker. Last year's final was very much a tactical battle and a bit of a, probably you would say, if it wasn't for the spectacle and the fans returning, a little bit of a chore to watch at times until it got towards the later stages. I think this year it's going to be a thriller as well. However, I don't think much is going to separate them. Both teams are leaky at the back. Linfield are ruthless going forward, and Larne probably create more chances on their day for me. So I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw. We're going to penalties, and then I've got to draw the straws. Who's it going to be? I think Linfield are going to win it on penalties, because if they get towards that stage, you'll see all the strikers on at the same time. And when you've got the likes of Lavery and Waterworth stepping up, you've always got a chance. So I'm going for Linfield on penalties, but I agree with you that the game itself will be an absolute thriller.
Definitely.
And that's it for the second year for the beautifully sponsored Sadler's Peaky Blinder Irish Cup final, which is live on Friday night on BBC Two Northern Ireland. Let us know down in the comments who you think is going to win, how you think the game's going to pan out, and of course, who you're supporting, who you want to win, and whether you think it will happen. If you did like what you see, please do chuck a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast. There's loads of interviews with half of the players involved in this game up in the eye above. Thank you to Charlie for joining me as always. You can follow us on Twitter at HonestFootball3. And hopefully we'll see you next time.